Hey guys, Kim from Oz Tuning, and we just wrapped up tuning on Mark Shearer's 2022 F150. You guys know this truck. This was the very first 21 to 23 F150 that we tuned. This was also the truck with the Pro Charger that we tuned as well. So this round, we've gone a little bit further, and we've installed L&M's new Gen 4 F150 cams with their spring package as well. And this has been long overdue for us to get this video done. Unfortunately, we ran into some other mechanical issues unrelated to the cams with the truck that took a little longer than we expected to get figured out. But we just wrapped up, and I gotta say the results are impressive. We all knew that the cams in these 21 to 23 trucks were a little less aggressive or smaller, low profile than the previous generation trucks. And with these cams from L&M, it is an absolutely different animal. So we're gonna get to the results and show you everything, but this is gonna be kind of a little bit of a different format of a video. Not only are we gonna show you the end results of how everything turned out, but I'm also gonna show you a couple of the steps along the way and explain the different steps in the process and all the things that we learned while we were dialing these in. So we'll jump into that, and then we're gonna show you guys the results at the end, okay?
Now, before we hit the dyno, we actually spent quite a bit of time dialing things in on Mark's truck on the street and through data logs. Initially, with the cam data that I received from Mike and the guys at L&M, I've decided on where I thought the valve events should be to kind of get us started and get us in the ballpark. I set up the tune with those valve events in mind, and then we started doing some data logging. There was a lot of logging involved before we could ever get to this point. A lot of that came down into tuning the VE tables, because these are speed density trucks, not mass airflow like the Mustangs. And camshafts change the volumetric efficiency of an engine, and it changes it pretty drastically. So there was a lot of heavy logging involved initially just to get the airflow model kind of where it needed to be for the new camshafts. So once we kind of got that dialed in, then we could start doing some wide open throttle pulls, and we got ourselves in a pretty good spot, and we got this baseline. So as you can see, pretty good baseline. We made 437 wheel horsepower, 391 pound-feet of torque, and you know, that's great. Really good power. You can see that things kind of start to fall off a little bit here, about the 7,000 RPM range. So that was something that we saw, and we said, hey, maybe there's something there. We'll dig into this a little bit further. But this is where we started from. So all in all, not bad. Also important to note that all of these dyno pulls, all of this testing was done using E85. Now, we could have used 93 octane or even 87, but the reason we used E85 was because we wanted to remove fuel quality as a variable from the equation while we're testing these cams. Now, it is possible when you're moving camshafts around that you can change what is referred to as the dynamic compression ratio. And that's kind of a debated point in the industry as to whether that's a real thing or not. But essentially what it comes down to is that you can move the valve events to a point that can effectively kind of increase the pressure inside of the combustion chamber. And you could possibly get to a point where that pressure is enough that maybe you become octane limited on using a lower octane fuel. So to remove the possibility of that being a variable in our testing, we decided we were going to do all of our testing here on E85. So that doesn't mean that you can't run these cams on pump gas or anything like that. You absolutely can, but for testing purposes, we wanted to limit those variables, and so we decided to use E85. So once we've got E85 in the tank and we're doing all this, we've got our baseline. So one of the first things that I decided to do, because I looked at this curve and I said, hey, you know what? That curve looks pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with where at least these baseline valve events are happening, or the VCT positions. So let's play with a couple other things and see where we're at to make sure that everything else that we've done in the baseline is kind of where it needs to be as well. So one of the first things I decided to adjust was the start of injection for the direct injection system. And start of injection essentially just refers to at what point in the crankshaft rotation in degrees do we begin to inject fuel from the direct injector. And the injection events from the direct injection system can have a big impact on performance. Injecting it too late or too early can cause issues with how the fuel is actually mixed inside of the combustion chamber. And then you could have things like incomplete combustion or inconsistent combustion. So having the injection event correct for what you're doing with the engine is important. So we decided to go ahead and actually kind of retard the start of injection event, or make the start of injection event happen a little bit later. And I'll show you the results from that. So here we go. So this was a fairly small adjustment to the start of injection point. And as you can see, we lost quite a bit of power. Now, this is something that many tuners probably are not doing. And really, they're losing out by not, I guess is the best way I can describe it. As you can see, just a small change in the start of injection, we've lost, 15 horsepower, so 12 to 15 pound-feet of torque, and it's through basically the entire RPM range. And that's also something that's not necessarily easy to see on a data log. Dyno graph really kind of illustrates this a little bit more. And this is essentially just free horsepower, right? So, just moving and optimizing these injection events in the direct injection system could get you 15 wheel horsepower. That's pretty impressive, without changing anything else. We've used the same exact cam timing. We're running the same exact ignition timing. We're running the same exact commanded lambda. Nothing else has changed. All we decided to do was to move the start of injection. Now, in this case, we lost power, right? But if we were using an unoptimized start of injection point to begin with, and then we optimized it, we would be gaining power. So this is an important thing. So guys, if you're tuning these vehicles and you are not optimizing your injection timing, learn it and start doing it. You're leaving free horsepower on the table. So since we saw that moving the injection event later did not help our cause, we said, okay, we're pretty optimized there, so we'll leave it where we're at, and then we're just going to start moving the cams around a little bit. Now, in terms of cam timing, typically the intake cam is the one that you want to move first. And the reason for that is that the intake valve closing event tends to have the biggest impact on cylinder charge fill, and what essentially equates to power. So we had a pretty good idea of where we wanted the intake valve closing to occur because of the data that we received from L&M. And so we said, well, let's go ahead and see if we're on target or if there's anything left to be made. And we only adjusted really from 5,000 RPM and above. And the reason for that is that any of these aftermarket camshafts that you're going to run in a Coyote engine that still allows the use of full VCT, you're always going to have to contend with the issue of piston to valve clearance. And because of that, you're going to be limited on how much you're going to be able to advance the intake cam. And so from 5,000 and below, we've fully advanced the intake cam as much as we can, so we can't advance it anymore. And if we could, there would probably be some torque gains to be had down here, but the reason that we can is because if it were to advance further, the added lift and duration from these camshafts would then cause piston to valve clearance issues. And there are camshaft options available that do allow that. However, those type of camshafts would not be able to be used with a stock piston. You would either need to cut valve reliefs in the stock piston, or you would need to go to an aftermarket piston that does have adequate valve reliefs in the piston to avoid piston to valve contact. So from 5,000 RPM and above, we decided to go ahead and start moving the intake cam. And so you can see that we did lose a little bit of power here from about 5,000 to just before 6,000 RPM range. So, It's not a huge amount, but it's definitely there. It looks like about 8 horsepower or so roughly. But one of the things that we did gain is here up top. We were able to carry that power out further, whereas before we were dropping. So you can see we're down 418 wheel horsepower here, and we're at 433 wheel horsepower here. So we got a pretty substantial increase there, and we were able to carry that power out further, all the way out to 7,500 RPMs. Probably would even go a little bit further. But with this being a stock bottom end engine, we just decided we were going to stop around 7,500 or so. So that worked out really well, and we said, okay, we've got something here that we can work with. And then we went back here and we made a few more revisions, moving the intake cam a little bit more, and we finally got ourselves dialed into a curve that we liked, where we were able to kind of keep all this and then carry it all out the rest of the way. So then we moved on. So initially, when you're tuning camshafts, it's about finding where the intake cam wants to be. And then the second half of that equation is figuring out where the exhaust cam wants to be. So intake valve closing is kind of what runs the show, if you will. And then the exhaust valve opening is probably next in line in terms of what's going to impact performance or power. So we want to get all the air charge that we can into the cylinder, and then we want to make sure that we are not opening the exhaust valve too early or too late, so that once we've got all that air charge in the cylinder, we're using all of that air and all of that fuel mixture to apply as much force and as much torque as we can, force to the piston, and then again piston to the connecting rod, which is going to create our torque as it rotates the crankshaft. So let's take this off. Let's get rid of this intake valve opening adjustments here, back to our baseline. And so the next thing we did was we started moving the exhaust cam, and this was an aha moment for me personally. So this was actually a relatively small change. This is the final results of moving the exhaust valve, exhaust cam around, but the initial adjustment that we made was around 5 degrees of adjustment to where we were at on the baseline, and we immediately saw gains. And so we continued to adjust it further, and this is where we ended up. So this was, in the grand scheme of things, a relatively small change for the position of the exhaust cam. But you can see we just picked up power through the entire curve. All the way through, we picked up power. We've picked up power all the way, keeping it past 7,500 RPMs. So this immediately told me that, hey, we were probably opening our exhaust valve a little too early in our baseline settings. And so instead of using that combustion force inside of the cylinder to push the piston down, we were letting a lot of that go right out the exhaust valve. So once we got the exhaust cam into a more ideal position, boom, all of a sudden we start making a lot more power. And to give you an idea, I'm going to turn off the baseline here, and I'm just going to turn back on our adjustment that we had made with just the intake valve, so you can kind of see those two next to each other. So yeah, I mean, we're carrying out the power even a little bit further. We've got a little bit of a dip here, but you know, that's kind of inconsequential because we sometimes see that from run to run. But even through here in the mid-range, this is, I mean, massive gains through the mid-range here. Lots of power up top still as well. Lots of torque down low here. So yeah, awesome results just from moving the exhaust cam. So let's turn back on our baseline. Let's turn off our intake valve opening adjustments, and we're going to turn off the exhaust valve for now. And so once we kind of figured, let me back up. So once we've figured out where we want the exhaust valve events to be, we've got where we kind of know where we want the intake valve events to be. Depending upon how radically you've adjusted the exhaust cam, you'll typically want to go back and make another run through the intake cam as well, because when you move the exhaust cam quite a bit, sometimes you're going to run into increased overlap, or any number of things. And so it's always a good idea to go and revisit the intake cam. And so we did. We went back to the intake cam and made some adjustments, and we found that we were right on the money where we needed to be. So we didn't end up with any further adjustments to the intake valve opening. So at that point, we were really happy with the cam settings themselves, or with our VCT tuning. So then we started to go back into, okay, what else can we adjust here to see if we can find some more power. And we were over at our buddy Dave Rowland's shop using his dyno, and Dave is a incredibly intelligent guy. Is a old school drag racer for many years, has an extremely fast Toyota Celica import car that's close to 2,000 horsepower, four-cylinder engines running on Motec, and just a all-around great guy, smart guy. So shout out to you, Dave. We love you. And Dave, in all of his wisdom and maybe just being funny, he said, "Hey, don't these things have port injection too? And don't they have hybrid injection?" Like, yeah, they do. And it's, aren't you running on E85? I said, yeah. He says, well, everybody says that ethanol pulls heat out of the air charge, and so maybe if you blend in some more port injection, maybe you can pull some heat out of the air charge. And it was a hot day. We were doing this testing in Florida in September. And so he said, maybe you should try some port injection, and maybe you'll pick up some power there. So I said, hey, Dave, that sounds a good idea. Let's try it. So we did. And so we'll turn back on the final where we decided we were at with the terms of the VCT adjustments, and then we'll turn on what we did here. So essentially what we did is that, okay, well, let's just do 50-50. Let's see what it says. And so we did. 50% port injections, 50% direct injections. So essentially we're delivering the same quantity of fuel, or the same fuel mass to the cylinder, but we're delivering it through 50% on each side of the injection system. And as you can see, results were maybe not what most people would expect. Up here at the top, yeah, pretty much the same. Not any huge major differences here. But down here at the bottom, wow, what a difference. That is a substantial loss in torque. 372 to 356, so roughly 18 pound-feet of torque, 18 horsepower, no, torque, 18 pound-feet of torque. Horsepower, we're down from 283 to 271, so we were about 12 horsepower there. So yeah, that's a big difference. So why is that the case? Well, there's been some guys on the internet that have made some comments about the Ford direct injection system being, I think the word they use is problematic. I'm not really sure what their definition of problematic is, but this goes to show you is there is power to be had in the direct injection system. We've had two great examples so far just in the testing for this truck alone. Changing the injection timing, there's power to be made there. Changing the blend ratio and using more direct injection versus port injection, there is power to be made there. These direct injection systems, these are Bosch direct injection systems. The high pressure pumps, the injectors, the PCMs, the control logic, everything is Bosch. And Bosch is the pioneers. They invented this whole direct injection deal, and it's the same direct injection systems that have been used in BMWs and Audis and Mercedes and Ferraris and Lamborghinis, and basically any high-end vehicle that you could name for the last, probably 2 decades have used this type of injection system. So I'm not sure where certain people have come up with this logic of this system being problematic, but I don't think the results kind of line up with that. Now, let me explain why we've made more power here. So this comes down to not about removing heat from the air charge or any of that type of stuff, right? This comes down to simple airflow. And the fact is, direct injection is injecting the fuel mass directly into the combustion chamber. So it's injecting the fuel where the air has already entered into the cylinder, which is where we want it, right? As opposed to injecting the fuel up in the port or in the intake runner. Now, what happens when we inject fuel in the intake runner? Well, the intake runner only has a certain volume, right? It has a certain amount of volume, and any fuel that you inject into that runner displaces air that would normally go into the combustion chamber, right? So you inject fuel, instead of bringing air into the cylinder, less air means less power. So this is why we're seeing this big decrease in power here and this big decrease in torque, because instead of the air going into the combustion chamber so that we can now have more air charge, more fuel, and more power, now we've displaced that air by injecting fuel into the intake runner. So this old problematic DI system seems to be providing some pretty good benefits when you know how to use it properly, when you know how to adjust it, when you know how to use it to its fullest capability. So there you go. I think they say the proof is in the pudding, and that's pretty good pudding, I guess. So we said, well, hey, that didn't really work. So why don't we go the other direction? So instead of going heavier with the port injection, let's go heavier with the direct injection. And look at that. What do you know? We're making power. Making torque, everything's a win all the way across the board. We're picking up power and picking up performance, right? So, you know, I don't know, again, hate to beat a dead horse, but I don't see very many problems with this system. So, yeah, I don't know. But, you know, this is maybe a good talking point for any of you other tuners out there that maybe haven't invested the time to really understand how this direct injection system works and to really understand how to control it properly. Maybe this is your sign to spend some time to learn how it works and how you can use it, because this is just free horsepower. It's free power that you can give your customers that is not only free, but it's also decreasing potential for knock, and actually it becomes more fuel efficient. So you get a win-win-win, which is really hard to find in anything that you do in terms of performance when it comes to any sort of engine, really. So we're kind of getting to the final point here. So we did a little more testing with some of the DI blending and moving some of the injection events around a little bit, and we got everything kind of dialed in, and we said, okay, our fuel is good, our cam timing is good, our injection events are good. I said, well, the only thing we haven't really looked at yet is ignition timing. So we said, okay, let's go ahead and see if we pull a little bit of timing out for it. Where are we at? And so I'm going to actually turn the baseline off here, and we'll do it this. Yeah, so this was same VCT, same cam timing, same all that, and then we just decided we were going to take 1 degree of timing out of it. And you can see we've got a little bit of a gains in some of the areas, like, you know, a couple of horsepower here and there, but we didn't really lose any power, and that's the key, right? So if you're not losing power and you can run less ignition timing, then that's always preferable, right? So this is essentially where we ended. This is our final revision with all of our direct injection timing optimized, our blending optimized, our ignition timing optimized, our lambda targets optimized. So everything optimized. Now, this was, again, about 6.5 hours worth of time on the dyno. So we've got 6.5 hours, and if memory serves, we were probably somewhere between 20 and 30 dyno pulls. Now, again, this is 6.5 hours on a dyno, but this is also multiple days of data logs of dialing in the VE, the torque tables, the ignition timing tables. So there's a lot of work here. Now, I'm going to show you guys the final results, and we'll disable this one and go back to our baseline. And so this is where we started the day on the dyno versus where we ended the day on the dyno. And you can see there are some really, really impressive gains. We were able to carry out that power quite a bit further. We were also able to make more torque all through the mid-range here, more power up top. So everything was just a win all the way around. Now, there's a couple of things to note here, though, is we probably wouldn't have found all of this performance or all this potential power if we didn't finish on the dyno. Now, I am not against dynos in any way, shape, or form. Dynos are a tool, and dynos can be, when used properly, are very important in the tuning process. However, you don't always need a dyno. There are many cases where you can perfectly tune a vehicle without using a dyno. The data that we can now capture using HP Tuner software is able to get us, 99% of the way of where you're going to get on a dyno tune. For example, camshafts are a different story because camshafts change the characteristics of the engine in such a way that a lot of the baseline data that we have in the stock calibrations where we build our tuning from, a lot of that stuff kind of goes out the window. So finishing up on the dyno when we're doing something like camshafts, I think, is important. And you're definitely going to get, definitely you can get really good results without getting on the dyno. I mean, we can see that. We've got 437 wheel horsepower and 391 pound-feet of torque. However, spending a day on the dyno netted us substantially more horsepower and substantially more torque. So it's definitely worth it. If you're planning camshafts, highly recommend that you also plan to at least go one day to the dyno to kind of get things dialed in or finalized. So this is our final results from the baseline versus optimized on the dyno, and then to give you guys an idea of how these cams compare to what the stock cams would do. Now, unfortunately, I don't have this particular truck that I can compare directly with, but we have essentially the same exact modifications on a different truck. This was done on the same dyno about a month or so, but from one another. And I'm going to turn off the final revision to show you our baseline versus the stock cams. So baseline versus the stock cams, you can see we've definitely got some really, really good gains. This is, again, same setup. We've got AFS ported GT350 manifold, long tube headers on E85, same 373 axle ratio, similar size tires. So as close as we could possibly get to the same setup. So it's a pretty good comparison. I understand it's not the exact same truck. However, this wasn't possible in this case for us to compare the exact same truck. So, but you can see this was the non-optimized baseline tune, and we still see great gains. 30 wheel horsepower. We've got an increase in torque from about 4,000 RPM and up. Do see a decrease in torque here as well. That comes back to not being able to advance the cams because of piston to valve clearance. But that's not actually a huge deal, and I'll explain that in just a moment. So now let's turn off the baseline and give you guys the final revision. And wow, that is impressive. I know that there is a common misnomer that camshafts don't make power on Coyote engines. I've heard that for years. I've heard lots of people all over the internet say that, and I think I'd have to disagree. I think 50 wheel horsepower gains on a naturally aspirated Coyote Gen 4 F150 engine, which is not even as optimized as, say, a Mustang GT engine, I would call that pretty impressive. I would say that that might be worth the price of entry there. Now, that's not to say that that if you just threw a set of cams in there and you just did some basic tuning that you're going to be completely satisfied with it, because obviously we went through a lot to get to this point. Now, another thing that I should mention, and hey, tuners in the back, pay attention, because if you're not doing this, you are doing a big disservice to yourself and your customers. Now, we notice this little loss of torque down here below 3,000 RPM. Now, the good thing about a 10R80 transmission is that once you're wide open throttle, you're never going to see this area here. So you're basically going to be living from this 6,000 RPM and up range. So this is kind of inconsequential in terms of performance in racing, in a racing aspect or acceleration. But you definitely would feel this in part throttle and maybe normal daily driving. Now, that would be completely true if the person doing the tuning did not spend the time to optimize the valve events at part throttle. And I think that that's why Coyote engines, or excuse me, Coyote camshafts get a bad rap, because I think a lot of tuners, they just do this part, you know, let's make the dyno graph look good, and then they forget about the 90% of the other range of operation where you actually drive your vehicle. And if you are not tuning the part throttle VCT, not even just with camshafts, but even with stock camshafts, and if you're not doing that on your supercharged tunes, and you're not doing that on your turbo tunes, and you're not even doing that on your naturally aspirated tunes, you are missing out. There is a lot of performance to be had. There's a lot of drivability improvements to be had. Now, if the part throttle VCT is tuned like we've done with these cams on this truck, you really don't notice this. This isn't, it's not a huge issue, this little less torque that you're seeing down here. It's because the lack of being able to advance the camshaft in this range really only applies when we're at wide open throttle and you've got equalized manifold pressure to barrow. So when we've got at part throttle and vacuum is higher, we have increased port velocity through the intake manifold and going down those intake manifold runners. And so that increased port velocity under vacuum doesn't really require that we have all that advance in the intake cam. And so if you do your job as a tuner and you tune that part throttle VCT, you're actually going to feel a huge improvement in torque and drivability and overall response from the engine. So guys, tuners, do your work, do your job. Don't do half of it. Do all of it. You've got to tune all of the driving range. You've got to tune the VCT at idle. You have to tune it at light loads and part throttle. You've got to tune it at medium to heavy loads, and you've got to tune the wide open throttle. Just wide open throttle, that's not enough. That's not enough. And really, that's why cams get a bad rap, because if you don't tune the part throttle VCT as a tuner and you let those cams go to the valve events or the cam positions that are used in the stock tune, those valve events are completely wrong for these aftermarket camshafts. You not only is it not going to run well, it can misfire and do all kinds of weird things. So, like, don't do it. Do the work. Tune it. Tune the VCT. Do it all. And you're going to have a super happy customer, and you're going to have a great driving vehicle that's going to be super impressive. So guys, that's it. That's where we wrapped up. Let's wrap up this video. Great job from Mike and his team at L&M. The cams are really impressive. 50 wheel horsepower on a naturally aspirated F150. That is impressive.
All right, guys. So there you have it. As you can see, there's a lot of work that goes into this. To do it right, it takes time. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort, and it's not just something that you're going to throw together, this kind of type of a tune, in 1, 2, 3 revisions. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. So, you know, this type of video is not meant to call anybody out or say this tuner is better than that tuner or anything like that. It's just kind of to pull back the curtain a little bit and let you show you what our process is and how we handle this type of tuning and this type of modification. It's not a small task. This is a very labor-intensive process to do this, but there's only one way to do it right, as you saw in the dyno graphs. There's plenty of ways that you can do it mediocrely, But if you want the best results, you have to put in the work. You have to collect the data, and you have to do the testing. Unfortunately, it's this type of modification, camshafts, that have kind of gotten a bad rep in the Coyote world. Oh, cams aren't worth it. Oh, cams don't make any power on Coyote engines. And I think you can see that that's just not true. And sure, you could put the nicest parts in the world on your truck, and if the guy behind the keyboard isn't doing his job and making sure that he's doing everything that he can to get you all the power that you should, well, then yeah, you're probably going to be disappointed in the results, especially with a modification like this. Cams are expensive. They're labor intensive to install. If you can't do it yourself, it's going to be more expensive. And at the end of the day, it could make it or break it, the guy behind the keyboard. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. We're really excited about the results. We're going to be throwing the belt back onto the Pro Charger here real soon, and we'll get it right back onto the dyno with the Pro Charger on it and see what kind of gains we get from that. I'm expecting really big results. So you guys stay tuned.